Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here, and today we are going to talk about Yelan in Yoimiya Geo Vape. If you've seen my previous video, this is basically the Yelan Math Guide 6B. 6A we went into detail about Yoimiya Geo Vape versus Yoimiya VV Vape comps, and I even did comparison using CC Xingqiu. Here, we are going to talk in detail about Yelan replacing Xingqiu in the Geo Vape, and why the Geo Vape and not the VV Vape. You can check out the Math Guide 6A for details on that. But I can tell you that Yelan's damage in a Yoimiya Geo Vape versus a Hu Tao Geo Vape is pretty much the same. More or less, pretty much the same. Okay? So that's the reason why I switched to talking about Yoimiya instead of Hu Tao. Because anyway, we are really only looking at Yelan's damage here. Now, before I start, just bear in mind that these are the items that we're going to go through here: the nodes and assumptions, Geo Vape Rotation itself, energy, Aqua versus Sacrificial, Bow SC0, damage and DPS in Geo Vape, artifact comparison, and as well as a comparison of Hu Tao VV Vape versus Yoimiya Geo Vape. And remember, this is not a full team DPS, this is not comparing Hu Tao versus Yoimiya, okay? Stop. I want to stop those sims, illogical sims from coming to argue about this. It is purely looking at Yelan's DPS in Hu Tao VV Vape versus Yoimiya Geo Vape. That's it. Next is the TLDR, obviously, and then the Yelan video series. I'm actually very interested in the next video now. I've been giving it some thought over the past few days too. How best to optimize it, etc. But I've not done the actual math. So, yeah, this is what we're going to cover today. And without further ado, let me go into the important notes and assumptions, which is pretty much the same as all the previous math guides. This is just placed here in case this is the first time. This is the first of the Yelan math guide that you're looking at of all the series that I've done, of the entire series that I've done. So I'm not going to go through all this in detail. If you want to, you can pause and read all of this. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Not going to go through them. I only went through them on the very first video. Okay. Let's talk about Geo Vape Rotation. This is the C0 rotation. Notice, obviously, we start with a Zhongli E hole, right? And by the way, if you want to know how the vape comp is like, look at the Math Guide 6A. That's where we talk about the actual characters and why you are using these characters. But basically, you have Zhongli, Yelan, Yunjing, and Yoimiya. Okay. So we're going to do a Zhongli E hole, and we're going to place the steel away. We do not want his pillar or steels to mess up all the vapes. To steal away the aura that we need for vapes. Now, once this is done, we start with the Yelan string of actions. Then the Yunjing EQ M1 Yoimiya action, and you'll notice that there's some additional Yunjing E right here. Because timing wise, it actually matches up. Is able to use twice in this 19-second rotation, because Yunjing E is only on a 9-second cooldown. That's before you get one of her early constellations that reduces the cooldown as well. Okay, I am not taking that cooldown reduction constellation to consideration at all here. And it's important for her to do this additional E. And I'll talk more about it in the energy section. So from the frame analysis, I did a frame analysis with the existing characters that we have, because you know we have all these characters as a Yelan. So Yunjing takes up about 3 seconds with the 3 actions above. So this means that Yelan E after Q, which is this E here, it can only last 1.5 seconds for Yoimiya to get a full Yelan Q on her uptime. You can only afford 1.5 seconds here on this E itself, which may be an issue for tagging enemies. Maybe you have to sacrifice some AoE damage. But remember, you are doing this action here. Okay? Zhongli E hole is about 1.5 seconds, Yelan CA is about 0.4 seconds. We just to get 0.5 seconds for easy counting when you have the breakthrough bout. So this is about 2 seconds. 2 seconds is basically more or less sufficient for the melee mobs to approach you. So in a scenario where you have more melee mobs than ranged mobs, it's actually not an issue for your AoE damage without a pull. Obviously a pull is still better, but it's still manageable. This 1.5 second thingy is still manageable. I've not seen that you will be able to tag the ranged mobs. Obviously you wouldn't be. Okay? But it's slightly better than you think. That's what I'm trying to say here. Now, the rest of this is pretty much the same as what I have done previously in the previous math guides, but there is one thing that's slightly different here. Okay, not really slightly different, but like similar to Kazuha, who was the last character before we switched into Hu Tao for the previous math guides. Oh, your main DPS per se. There's always an N1 done. Why? To do a hydro application. So the same thing is being done on Yunjing here. And it also helps because if the forwardness on Yunjing did not trigger on the E and Q for some reason, then at least you have another chance to trigger it on M1. It should be sufficient. 3 attacks. Okay, so the rest of this is the same. I'm not going to go through that in detail. Let's talk about C1 or C0 with Sacrificial Bow next. Now we have additional E here, and it's been done right before the Q. Because remember, we need to make sure that Yoimiya action gets the full Yelan Q uptime. That's why this is done before. Okay, and you can see here. This is the full explanation. But rather than talking about that, there's one thing I want to call out here that's different from the C0 rotation, which is that actually the Yelan's E damage will also have a slight pull towards Yelan when exploding. Which means that when your Yelan E damage, when it does trigger, there's actually a explosion on the enemy, although it's not an AoE explosion that can hit other enemies, so there's no quadratic scaling. But it does do a pullback, a pull towards Yelan when they are being exploded and knocked back into the air. You can check this out in the leg animations right now. Yeah, there really is a slight pull. So the 1.5 second on your second E may still be able to attack all enemies, even without any more pull. But obviously, actual testing is required for this, especially if you have range modes that are very far apart, and yeah, you can't, man. It's just not possible. But if they are not too far apart, your first E will be pulling them together. On top of that, the initial cast time here will be giving the mini mods time to approach you. So it's not as bad as you would think, right? It's still pretty doable, especially for the C4 effect, because C4 requires you to tap 4 enemies. So C4 may help with this, even without any more pull. But I don't want to be too copium. You have to be very realistic with this. You can say that it helps, but it's not guaranteed. Okay, like the C4 backstack effect, it's not gonna be guaranteed in this rotation. I can safely say that. You may be able to tap 2 to 3 enemies instead of just 1. This is what I'm trying to say here. What this means, right, is that it may be easy to tap 2 to 3 enemies, but 4 may be a little difficult. But to simplify my math, I'm still assuming that you get 4. Okay? Because this is a comfort comp. In the first place, if you are choosing something like Geo Vape, you should know that you are sacrificing your damage potential for comfort. Okay, the rest of this is the same. I'm not going to talk about this. These are all covered in my previous math guides. C6, obviously we add a 6 as normal attack right after the Q. This is the C6 effect. Now because of the C6 adding a 2.5 second right after the Q, we will have to use a press on the second E instead of hold, so as to increase Yelan Q uptime on Yoimiya, which means that you are basically sacrificing some of your AoE damage in return for a full Yelan Q uptime on Yoimiya. So I guess it really depends on your situation. If you are facing a lot of enemies, maybe you want to sacrifice the Yelan Q uptime on your Yoimiya. But if you are facing like one strong enemy with a few trash mobs, it may be better to focus on the single target damage and getting more Yelan Q uptime on your Yoimiya. And you gotta know that even if I do a press instead of hold, the last 1 to 1.5 seconds of Yoimiya's action will still not have Yelan's Q buff with this. There's just too much on-field time that Yelan is taking with this, even though I do one of the E right before the Q. Okay, so I hope this is clear, and obviously for my Yelan math, I will take into consideration that there won't be one less proc in this Yoimiya action here. Let's talk about energy rotation and ER requirements. So this is C0 Yelan without Sacrificial, and these are the values, the ER values for Yunjing, for Zhongli, for Yoimiya, and for Yelan. You'll notice right off the bat that it's slightly lower, yeah? But I will not jump the gun, I will talk more about it later, but you'll notice that we have about 17.2 energy to 70. Typically, if your ER is not like so high, it's not like 200 plus, it should be about 10 energy for enemies. But if your ER is very high, like 200 or close to 200, like 170, 180, etc., you'll get more energy from your enemies. So it does extend the amount of energy that's required. Sorry, not extend. It does reduce the amount and the total energy required here. It gives you a bigger allowance. So something like 17.2 energy instead of 10 energy is feasible when you have such high amount of ER. Okay. So due to the second Yunjing E here, the energy situation is slightly better on Geo Vape, and ER can be reduced to 220. If you remember my VV Vape, we are not using any of Amber's E. So unless you want to switch to her to do normal attacks to proc the Favonius, which will extend your rotation. But on the Yunjing E, the rotation is actually matching. With the additional Yunjing E, is still matching the rotation that is on the VV Vape comp in terms of the duration, if we assume that you don't need to do a long E. Okay, now you're not getting any energy from Zhongli's E because you're placing the pillar away, so they are not going to generate any energy. Because the way Zhongli's E generate energy is not based on the moment he uses his E, but it's based on the resonance progging effect, the damage prog from his E over time. So all the three characters have 1 E each, Yunjing having 2. Thankfully, Yunjing is pretty suited to using Favonius, and this rotation allows you to get 2 Favonius effects, which is very, very nice. And I'll say that you really need Favonius on your Yunjing in this comp, otherwise this comp just can't work energy-wise. Okay? Even with 250 ER, if you don't have the Favonius effect, it's not going to be enough. Because our Zhongli is not contributing any energy. Our Yunjing is contributing, but without Favonius, it's only 2.6 for Yelan. 2.6. Yeah, let's not even bother talking about 2.6, yeah. So let's look at C0 Yelan with Sacrificial or C1 Yelan's rotation. You see that it's 165 ER now. I'll say that the energy situation is much better. Yelan ER requirement dropped to 165 to 170 compared to 220. With 165 ER, you only need 10.6 energy from enemies, which is very feasible. If you want to play safe, you can of course go for 170 ER. So to conclude, 165 to 170 ER is the target for Yelan at C1 or C0 Sacrificial Bow. For my math, I'll go with 170 ER since it's the lower DPS option between the two. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now let's look at the C0 Yelan Aqua versus Sacrificial Bow. It's actually pretty straightforward. You see that the figures are all positive, right? There's no negative figure. Because with the reduced ER in Yoimiya Geo Vape comp versus Hu Tao VV Vape comp, R1 Aqua performs much better. It's about 17% better than R5 Sacrificial Bow on 4 Emblem, which is also the best artifact build for her in VV comp, because your ER is so high. Right, so looking at the artifact build that matters the most, it also has the biggest damage boost for Aqua over Sacrificial Bow. Okay, wait, let me just replace this. Yeah. Okay, so a difference of 17% is only slightly better, or sorry, it's only slightly lower than the typical tier difference between a 4-star and 5-star. So a simple conclusion here is, if you're not getting C1, you intend to use her in this VV Vape comp, in this Geo Vape comp, you can consider using Aqua, unless you don't mind losing 70% damage. It's still 70% is definitely enough to make a difference. Let me put it that way. Okay. I'll probably go more into detail on this when we talk about like C1 or R1 type of comparison when we get nearer to Yelan release. Yeah. So let's look at Yelan damage and DPS in Geo Vape itself. Don't expect it to be as high as VV Vape, but you will be quite surprised with the results, let me put it that way. So it's actually not as bad as you would think. Like, she still hits 1 million at C6. Although you don't need R5. Without R5, you get R1. But if you look at Emblem, she is hitting 1 million at C6. Even in a Geo Vape, even in the comfort comp. Because Geo Vape is like the comfort comp versus the VV Vape, right? VV Vape has a higher damage potential. I've talked about this in Math Guide 6A, so do check out that Math Guide. So with this, right, what it means is that the DPS is actually not too bad. In fact, while C0 DPS with Aqua is average to slightly below average for takeable C0 R1 that's on field, not off field, due to the amount of ER required, it's about 13% lower than a C0 R1 high run Ayato's DPS in overweight hypercarry, which is expected, right? Because this is not hyperweight carry comp, this is a comfort comp. This is a comfort comp where it's very comfortable and easy to use, because you have such a strong shield with Zhongli, and you don't need to worry about Vapes being interrupted more or less if you cast your Zhongli pillar far away, or at least at the back, where your front is for your action. Okay? So C1 obviously still resolved the comp main issue beautifully, resulting in a significant boost over C0 R1 Aqua. Now it's not as high as the VV Vape comp where we get 34% and 50%, but here it's 23% and 30%. Still a very significant amount, or a substantial amount at least. And again, let me remind you guys that C1 value will not be as big in other comps, especially Taser Raiden, for example. Now C6 is actually looking really good. 1.02 million at R1 and 1.18 million at R5, which is about 44 to 51k per second. And this is about 14% to 21% better than C6 Ayato in overweight hypercarry, which is really good considering majority of the damage is off field. Right? Think about it, majority of the damage is off field. All of my comparison here is looking at on field DPS. But if you consider the fact that she's off field, then this is actually very nice damage. But I need to say this because I don't want people to say that I'm being copious. In fact, I already covered this briefly when we were talking about energy and the rotation. Let me just repeat again, or go in more detail here again. This is the best case scenario starting from C, because starting from C4 onwards, we are assuming a short E can tap 4 enemies for max C4 effect without any more pull. Like I've mentioned, the actions before the first Yelan E does give enough time for the mini-mobs to approach, and then your first E will do a slight pull of the mobs towards you for your second E. But the above figures are just assuming that, yeah, everything works out nicely, perfectly, beautifully. How about if it's a worst case scenario where it's all range mobs? So if I make it such that I extend my first E in the C4 plus rotations by another 1.5 seconds because I cannot afford to extend the second E. Remember, if you talk about the second E, you're going to lose even more Yelan Q on your Yoimiya uptime. So we will only extend the first E in the rotation starting from C4 onwards. If we extend it by another 1.5 seconds, that should give you enough time to tag everyone and get your C4 effect. The DPS will be about 42 to 48k, so it drops from 44 to 51k to 42 to 48k, which is still about 7% at R5 and 14% at R1 better than C6 Ayato in overweight hypercarry. So surprisingly, she can still perform better in a comfort comp versus Ayato in an overweight hypercarry, although it's not by much, which means that her AoE, the AoE portion of Yelan's damage will definitely drop off sooner, much sooner versus Ayato. I have already done a comparison on the single and AoE distribution of Yelan's damage and how it compares against Ayato. So if you want to do check out that math guide, I'll put it in the in-video link on the top right corner here and in the description as well. So I hope you guys can see that even in a comfort comp, she's still doing pretty good damage for your off-field DPS. Let's look at artifact comparison next. I think this is very straightforward, right? When you have high ERs like 220, 170, etc., emblem is obviously better. Although you do see that when it goes from 220 to 170, it does drop. Yeah, the advantage that it gains over the other artifacts. So 4 Emblem is the clear winner, even with just Don't Leave buff, and it's performing significantly better at C0 since higher ER. So please farm for 4 Emblem if you intend to use Yelan in Yoimiya Geo Vape. Simple as that. Let's talk about Yelan DPS in Hutao VV Vape versus Yoimiya Geo Vape. You can more or less extend it to Yoimiya VV Vape as well. This particular comparison here. But I'll talk more about that later. Similar but not exactly the same. Okay. A very important thing is that this is not a team DPS comparison. I am not comparing Hutao versus Yoimiya. Chill your boots. Okay, chill. Please hold off on jumping to conclusions, because this is not a team DPS comparison. This is only Yelan's. It's just to give an idea for her DPS. That's it. I'm not interested in any character versus character debate. Those are the most worthless kind of debates on the internet. I'm sorry, but it is. Unless you're like me, you're doing actual math comparison. Okay. Now, Geo Vape Rotation, these are the DPS figures. Vape Rotation, these are the DPS figures. Now let's look at the percentage difference here. It's pretty interesting, right? There's actually a constellation here where the figure is red, and red here means that the Geo Vape is performing better. So at C0, Yelan's DPS in Geo Vape actually does better than Vape with Amber by 7 to 10% due to lower ER from the 2x Favonius procs in Geo Vape that can be done without risk of interrupting your vapes or your swirls or extending your rotation by too much, etc. In fact, if it's Vape with Toma or Yenfei instead of Amber, if you remember when I talk about the Vape math guide, in the Vape math guide, I already mentioned that the ER target for the Vape comp with Toma or Yenfei can be reduced to 220. So if it's reduced to 220, it will bring it on par with her C0 DPS. But on top of that, if you have a C6 Toma, then the C6 Toma does get to boost the C6 Yelan 6S NA. So that's bear that in mind. And when the ER is the same, but Kazuha's buff are stronger, I can tell you the Vape with Toma or Yenfei should outperform Geo Vape. In fact, it's very likely that it will outperform Geo Vape. Okay, so remember, this particular result here, while surprising, is explainable by the fact that we are comparing the most extreme case of ER required, which is Vape with Amber. When you use Vape with Toma or Yenfei, it's 220 ER, not 250 ER. Alright? So at C1 plus, starting from C1, basically the Yelan DPS in Vape starts to outdo Geo Vape. All the figures are positive, yeah, so Vape is better. And we all know why, right? Because the drastic ER requirement is being reduced. But all in all, for a comfort comp to do better at C0 than, say, a Vape with Amber, at least for Yelan's damage, yeah, that's nice. Remember, this is just Yelan's damage. But if you factor in your main DPS character damage, not just Yoimiya, even Hu Tao as well, obviously Vape is better, as per the Yelan Math Guide 6A, where we compare Yoimiya's damage in these two comps, as well as the higher risk in Vape. Additionally, Yelan's damage in Vape with Toma or Yenfei will also very likely do better than Geo Vape as well, but Vape comes with a risk. So this statement here is pretty much the same as this, but it's just I wanted to call out the risk that comes. Okay, so higher risk, higher reward Vape. If you see my Math Guide 6A, you know what I'm talking about. If you want to know more details, please look at the Math Guide 6A to understand why we are saying all this here. Alright. Now, one other thing to note is that this comfort comp is a very single target focus comp. Your main AoE is coming from Zhongli's Meteor and Yelan's AoE. If you notice the rotation, I'm not even using his AoE, his Meteor. You can use it based on scenario or based on situation. You don't need to use it every rotation. And Yelan's AoE, I don't think I need to talk more about that, right? So I'll say comfort comp is better against boss, especially the shield and the resistance, interaction resistance. But you will for sure fall off a lot more versus VV mate once you have more enemies. So do remember that comfort comp is a comfort comp really is very single target. It's not like even the VV vape, right? Even though I'm using, say, someone like Hu Tao or Yoimiya, very single target, and then you have the Yelan's burst Q procs, which are single target as well. At least you still have AoE, some AoE from Yelan, you still have AoE from Kazuha's Q, etc. And you have pull to help with the damage as well, especially on Hu Tao, where it's not strictly single target per se. Okay, so I hope this is clear, this particular point here. Now let's go into the TLDR for this math guide here. Okay, so basically Geo Vape sacrifices your overall team damage for comfort. Simple as that. And it's also less complicated where you don't need to worry about whether you have another pyro character stealing your vapes. As for the Geo stealing vape, just place your steal away, not an issue. Okay? So these are the rotations for C0, C1, and C6. I'm not going to go through them. Please look at them in detail. Pause and look at them in detail if you need to. And for details on the rotations themselves, please watch the specific sections. Next, ER requirements in Geo Vape. Is 220 ER required for C0 Yelan without Sacrificial and 170 ER required for C1 plus Yelan or C0 Yelan with Sacrificial. C0 Yelan with Aqua Bow is about 17% better. Oh, actually, I don't put the only here, sorry. It's approximately 17% better than C0 Yelan Sacrificial with 4 Emblem. And again, remember that this is specific only to this Geo Vape comp. Please refer to the specific section for the details. This is a TLDR, I'm not going to go through the details. C0 Yelan damage in VV with Aqua is slight average to slightly below average because of the ER requirement. Although lower than the VV Vape is still pretty high, especially for off-field DPS. Let me just add a comma here. Okay. Now there are two options to solve this, right? Obviously, save on Aqua, use Sacrificial, or get C1. But it's a 17% loss if you use Sacrificial versus Aqua, so bear that in mind. Now, C1 solve the comps main issue perfectly, so there's a significant boost or substantial boost. 23% with 4 Emblem, 30% with 2 HOD, 2 TOT. For VV Vape, it's 34 and 50. Okay? So the lower the ER you need on C0, the less the impact of your C1. As simple as that. Now, C6 Yelan's DPS is about 14 to 21% better than a C6 Ayato DPS in overweight hypercarry, which is really good considering majority is off you, and that this is a comfort comp. This is not even a hypercarry comp. And the other thing is she also enables Yoimiya's high weight damage along with her A4 buffing it, which means the overall team DPS should be better and higher than the overweight hypercarry. At least single target. AoE wise, since she's still better and since her distribution is something like 60-40, 60% single, 40% AoE, I'll say it's maybe close to 2 to 3 enemies, or after 3 or 4 enemies, then the Yelan damage starts to fall against Ayato. If you want more details on that, just check out the math guide where I do the comparison, okay? In terms of single versus AoE. Next, we have 4 Emblem. 4 Emblem has artifact comparison. 4 Emblem has a bigger advantage now over the other artifact builds. It's 11% C0, 68% at C1+. So to conclude, please equip 4 Emblem for her in Geo Vape. That's a fantastic artifact domain to farm anyway. Okay? Okay, now the biggest portion here. I know this is supposed to TLDR, but there's a lot I need to talk about here. At C0, Yelan's DPS in Geo Vape actually does better than in VV Vape with Ember by 7 to 10%. But if you factor in your Yoimiya damage or even your Hu Tao damage, obviously VV Vape is better. As per the Yelan Math Guide 6a, where I compared Yoimiya's damage in these two comps and the higher risk in VV Vape. Additionally, even at C0, Yelan's damage in VV Vape with Toma and Yanfei would very likely do better than Geo Vape as well. Because we are using Ember here to do the math comparison, that's why Geo Vape is doing better. But when you're not using Ember, you're using Toma or Yanfei, you should do more. It's just that when you use VV Vape with Toma or Yanfei, it comes with a risk, right? One has a chance to steal your vapes, although it may not be that bad for Yoimiya versus Hu Tao, since Yoimiya has ICD. And Yanfei will be the higher difficulty to do a Pyrosaur. I'm not going to go into detail here, I'm just briefly mentioning it. If you want the details, again, go check out the Math Guide 6a. I also go into detail between the Toma and Yanfei option. At C1+, Yelan's DPS in VV Vape starts to outdo Geo Vape due to the drastic ER requirement being reduced. I think this should be pretty straightforward, I'm not going to talk more. This comfort coin is a very single target focused DPS here. Other than Zhongli's Q and Yelan's AoE, you pretty much have no AoE. So that's really very limited source of AoE damage. So I'll say that this comfort coin is very comfortable against boss, but it will fall off a lot more versus VV Vape with more enemies. So which to use really depends on your preference between comfort and risk, but obviously when you have higher risk, you get higher damage. My personal recommendation between the two will actually be VV Vape. I think I'll rather use VV Vape. I mean, I'd rather use my Zhongli in a com or team where I don't have to sacrifice comfort for damage, like for example Ito comp. But not everyone pulls for Ito, so I can understand that. But if I were to choose between the two, yeah, VV Vape will be what I would choose between these two. Oh, whew, that's a long stretch. Feel like I've been talking so fast and for so long. So the Yelan video series, we have completed artifact comparison, we completed VV Vape, Taser, and Geo Vape now. Next, I'm going to look at Yelan Vape EC Hypercarry. Why do I call it a Vape EC Hypercarry? Because we are going to look into doing forward vapes for Yelan, that's the vape, and EC for Raiden, that's the EC, with hypercarry buffs on both. Why do I say it's hypercarry buff on both? Remember, Yelan has very limited buff sources. If you use those limited in the comp, you are pretty much giving her a hypercarry buff. You are making her a hypercarry. And EC for Raiden, obviously. Raiden gets all the buffs that's required and constantly progging electro charge reaction, which is nice. And the best thing is that this is both in the same comp. So I would think that the overall DPS should be very high. I'll go more into detail in the next math guide for this. And after that, we finally go into weapon comparison. I'll probably want to do Favonius Bow as the very first one, like a Favonius Bow versus Sacrificial Bow versus Aqua. Yeah, maybe something like that. And I also want to go look at full HP versus crit build as well. I may do this before weapon comparison. I'm not decided yet. Depends on what the interest level for you guys are. Maybe you can let me know in the comments. And better yet, join me over at Twitch where I answer almost every question there too, yeah? This is the Twitch link and I'll put the link in the description as well. Whew. So, thanks everyone for watching. I hope the content has been helpful to you. If you like the content, remember to subscribe and like the video. Remember to like the video and subscribe for more. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.